report on the status of adopting a global plan for the probation department's halls and camps, which will be taken up with item 12, report on the probation department's efforts to maintain the Board of State and Community Corrections determination of suitability. For members of the public on the telephone, please press 1 then 0 now to comment on these items. Today we have with us Guillermo Viera, Chief Probation Officer, Kimberly Epps, Chief Deputy Juvenile and Adult Services, and Sheila Williams, Chief Deputy Administrative Services, Probation Department, who will provide us with a presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to address you with respect to how probation will maintain suitability with the control agencies, in particular the Board of State and Community Corrections, as well as an update with respect to the global plan on facilities and programming services for youth in both our juvenile halls, camps, and SYTF facilities. In terms of format, and bearing in mind the limited time, what I'd like to do is give an update with respect to the state of affairs in probation as it relates to those 3 items. And then I'll hand over the remaining time to Chief Deputy Epps to speak specifically on items with respect to continuing to meet the state standards, and then Chief Deputy Williams with respect to the global plan and programming. A year or so ago, where probation found itself was in a place where we'd essentially lost public trust. And on top of it, the state control agencies were sending a very clear message that for a very long time, years, they had been working with Los Angeles County, and we had yet to meet the minimum required standards under BSCC. Since that time, there have been some structural changes within probation to address 2 main components. One of them was simply compliance, to have a formalized compliance team that reports directly to the Office of the Chief. That continues today. The second was to create a campus safety and security office, also reporting to the Chief, to address the issues of safety. Both of those are now a permanent fixture in the department, and I believe incredibly important for the progress that will continue in probation. As I mentioned, where we sit today, we're in compliance with the BSCC regulations. That's very important. I think somehow along the way, folks have missed that. Today, we are in compliance at both our SYTF facilities and juvenile hall and the camps. We are providing the care needed for our young people up to state standards. So the discussions that we have from this point forward are about quality of services, about vision in terms of how to best serve the young people, but the question of whether we're in compliance or not, we're in compliance, and we will continue to remain in compliance, utilizing the resources that were identified to gain compliance, such as the utilization of having a chief compliance officer. Conditions with respect to contraband, while it continued to plague us, we see marked improvement. And I can tell you plainly, the number of young people that were found to have been under the influence in our facilities is different today than it was a year ago. While there's improvement to be had, when you go into our facilities today, the expectation that there should be no drugs, there should be no contraband is very clear to all. And we have steps that, while not perfect, we'll continue to improve upon to make sure that we get to that place where everyone understands that if you are found to be trying to bring drugs or other contraband to our facilities, we will prosecute criminally. This is too serious. We are the parents of these young people for the time that they're with us, and that is a non-negotiable. The ongoing lack of sufficient staff has been addressed by redirecting field staff. And the important component here is we've now trained staff that formerly were not working with juveniles up to standard so that they can work inside of the facilities with the same expectations and training as those that are permanently assigned to those facilities. That's a game changer. It is an area that we had missed before that has now been addressed. It's a cost because we would like to have more staff so that we could continue to have robust field services, but we understand that for the limited time or as long as we need to, that's a priority and we have to continue to do that. I do it in a mindful way to make sure that under circumstances that are not ideal, that we are disrupting our employees' lives as little as possible, but that's tough because we are using staff that came into one job, they thought that they would be performing X duties, and now we're asking of them to actually do a different job. All peace officer functions, but certainly not their ideal or where they had seen themselves at this point in their lives or their career. That's a burden on them. But I can tell you that our staffing situation is improving. We still have a long way to go, but that means that we have enough staff that is stepping up, understanding what's at stake, and despite all of those inconveniences, are adjusting and coming to work. We're in a better place today than we were a year ago when it comes to staff calling out and staff going to those jobs that they didn't volunteer for, but they understand that we need them there. So I'd like to spend at least the next couple of minutes into what we can expect moving forward. We're stabilizing, so that means that now we have to talk about quality of care and what are the new things that you can expect out of this probation department that perhaps you've not seen before. And for me, it centers around 3 core values or concepts. The first one is making good on a promise that we're going to use a multidisciplinary approach. What that means is when young people come into our facilities, we're going to focus on assessing them to understand their individual needs, and then providing services for the period of time that they're with us that's specific to them as individual and those needs. A few things have to happen moving forward for us to do that. We have to consolidate our population into smaller communities and contract for specific programming that centers around the folks of that community and the needs of those young people that are placed there. The second is a very open admission that that means that the team has to be more than simply peace officers and probation officers. That ideally, let's say a year from now, when you go into a juvenile detention facility, we have the understanding from day one that this is a young person that will be back in our neighborhoods, that will be one of our neighbors, that will be among us. So our focus from day one should be, how can we best prepare them and tend to their need for that eventual return? And that eventual return can be in 3 weeks, or it can be in a year, but however long they're with us, that we're tending to their specific needs. And that can only be done through an interdisciplinary team. That you should be able to walk into one of our units and you will see equal team members between the security staff, meaning the probation staff, that you would have probation staff that are licensed clinical social workers, MFTs, LPCCs as part of the team, in addition to some of the traditional roles. And this is something that has been done before. The classification exists, but we haven't used it to its full potential. And that it should shock no one that other team members might be a public health nurse, or it might be a contractor that is there for the entire shift to engage the youth in a different way. That it might be someone that's providing an arts program, that it might be, so that when we envision the team that is tending to the needs of that young person, let's say that shift, that team is composed of a multidisciplinary group, all focused on the same group of young people, but bringing something different that they may connect with that the other team member might not. The second value, and this one is particularly important to me personally, is it is now time to fully engage our partners to have joint ownership in our juvenile facilities. It's something I've mentioned before, but to be fair, we've not been in a position to fully execute. And while I have said the words that when you go to juvenile hall at Los Padrinos, there should be joint ownership between our partner county agencies such as DYD or public health, I've said it, but we've not been in a position because of the violence and the lack of staffing to actually move forward and do that. We are now in a position to do so. And so what you should expect is significant changes in which we engage our county partners. But let me give you an example. If you were to show up next year at LP, some things should be obviously different from the beginning, that it would be separated into different communities, and that you may see notices or policies or post orders that would have multiple agency head signature on it. Meaning this wasn't solely a probation decision, but that confronting a problem before us, we met as county partners and said, we're all at this facility every single day, every single shift. How do we confront this problem? And that we would jointly agree on that solution, and then you would see a united front, and our staff would understand that, and everybody visiting would understand that. That when we say a whole person approach, it extends beyond simply the team, but the decision making as well. And so what you'll see in the coming months is an invitation to these other county partners to physically be there with us, to make decisions with us, and to jointly. What has happened so far is that we're all there, and while there's collaboration, we're different departments with different budgets making different decisions. We need to do better than that. And until now, the largest obstacle has been probation out of necessity because we had to make sure that it's a sufficiently safe place to invite folks to come in and do that. I think we're in a position to move forward and do that now. And then third is my personal commitment that we need to have a very serious and thoughtful investment in our employees. Probation is our employees. And the world has changed, and we are asking our employees to do things that are significantly different than what the job was the day we hired them. And we're asking folks to do things year in and year out that frankly is incredibly stressful, and that if we don't concentrate on both a serious investment in them in terms of training, whether it be higher ed or specific training for them on site, and that we're serious about it, and that we don't say that investment can't be this year because it's too expensive, or that investment can't be this year because I need to deploy them to the hall, that we understand that they're not going to be able to perform those functions unless we give them a space to train and come up to par in the new areas. That's not a dig to our employees. That's an acknowledgement that we've not invested in them for the lifetime that they're with us. And the second is in wellness. We are asking them to do things that are extraordinarily difficult and over time have a very serious effect on their health. And that we need to tend to that as well. If we want them to be healthy models for the folks that they should be guiding while on probation, that we need to make sure that they're in a healthy place as well. And over the years, I can understand how our employees may have felt like they've been demonized and not invested in, and yet every day we ask them to come in and do very difficult work. And so that investment in them, we need healthy people to be able to be a light in other folks' lives. And so that moving forward, that has to be one of the pillars of what we do moving forward. I'll stop my comments here and allow Chief Deputy Epps to give you a much more specific update on BSCC.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, just to start with a quick recap, in February 2024, Both Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall and Barry J. Nydorf Secure Youth Treatment Facility were determined to be unsuitable for the confinement of minors. Subsequently, Field Representative Lisa Southwell conducted a targeted inspection between the weeks in March and April at both facilities and made a recommendation to the board that the non-compliance issues had been remedied. On April 11th, the board held a meeting and accepted the suitability and determined that we were now suitable. 3 members of the board voted against the determination of suitability, and 1 member of the board abstained. What I'll be talking about is how we were able to come into compliance and our plan to maintain compliance. Okay. So 202 field officers were deployed to Barry J. and Los Padrinos from field services. We also took a look at reassessing the resources in juvenile services where the caseloads are smaller to be able to accommodate the deployment, shifting some resources over to adult services, talking to the court, and talking with our partners in AB 109 to discuss our plan to let them know what we were doing. We reassigned a number of canines, AB 109, and contracted canine services for drug detection dogs and electronics detection dogs to both Barry J. and LP. We had also previously deployed our bureau chiefs to Los Padrinos and then began to deploy directors to give a higher level of oversight, coaching, and mentoring to living units in the facilities around the clock. Upon being determined to be unsuitable, we arranged a meeting with BSCC officials and took a leadership team to Sacramento to drill down on and discuss the areas of noncompliance, to get some clarification on what exactly we wanted to provide and to understand specifically about those, to look more closely at the report. From that same leadership team, along with others that were in the department, we created an internal BSCC compliance team, and we began to hold meetings weekly from an hour to 4 hours, depending on the session. BSCC staff were also either on site or constantly available to us to provide mentoring and technical assistance. That was done through revised procedures, identifying what we would be providing for proof of practice, clarifying documents so that they were consistent for use across Barry J and LP, and providing those to BSCC to get review and feedback on those. Our DOJ monitor provided technical assistance on developing a staffing analysis. We took a look at different positions, what was our relief factor, to come up with a number of scenarios based upon the population and staffing the facility for one-to-one supervision. In addition to ancillary posts, those are the posts that help do other things in the facility, such as movement, visitation monitoring, and things such as that. Our DJJ consultant, former DJJ director Michael Miner, was also on site at Barry J to provide mentoring and coaching, and was a member of our BSCC compliance team as well. In addition to convening our compliance team, there was additional work being done by members of the team to monitor our progress, to do inspections, to see if we were compliant in those areas, to come back and report back, and looking at what needed to be corrected and making changes as necessary to any revisions that we had made to policies or any forms. Were these processes working? Looking at safety checks, for example, how we were documenting how that was being reported back, and monitoring to meet our compliance standards. Our plan will remain basically the same to continue to maintain compliance. However, what we'll do this time around, we'll convene for 2 weeks. We have an initial standing meeting of 3 hours. Those could go as long as 5 hours. We will comprehensively go through all of Title 15. We will revise procedures, policies as necessary. We will work on new forms that are consistent between Barry J. Nydorf and Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. to determine our proof of practice. We will continue to work with our field rep, BSCC, Lisa Southwell, and other members of the BSCC staff to provide our proof of practice, to look at those policies for review, and to receive any feedback. We'll continue to establish long-term protocols and solutions to things to make sure that we're meeting all of the requirements. And developing those protocols and tools, continue to have accountability through ongoing inspections, compliance report outs, and remediating things from the report to maintain our goal of being in compliance. Of course, as I said, standardizing documentation, how we're collecting that documentation, having one source that's responsible for providing that documentation to BSCC, and strictly identifying points of contact so that we're consistent in our messaging and everybody doesn't have siloed messaging. We did have an inspection at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall, a targeted inspection on May 7th, and then there was a targeted inspection at Barry J. Nydorf on the 9th. Our preliminary report to us is that we are maintaining. We are awaiting a report back from BSCC. We will say there are some things that glitches with documentation, things we might need to improve in that, but so far we are maintaining, and we're looking forward to the full report back from BSCC. Sorry. So we're still developing, as I said, the comprehensive plan for long-term sustainability. The compliance team will continue to meet, but we're also looking at building a compliance team, pooling some of the people together to put them under one umbrella, because there's different things being monitored where we need to have a cohesive team. Again, drilling down on the regulations, not only the Title 15 regulations, but our policies are also inspected against the regulations, and there have been some inconsistencies. Our policy unit, we did do an assessment through our policy unit and sort of like a research review unit internal to probation, and they took a look at the last 10 years of non-compliance, and those issues of non-compliance were grouped as priority 1, priority 2 category, and priority 3. So as we move through all of the regulations to develop proofs of practice and to policies, we will flow through those groups, kind of intermingling, so it's not such big chunks to take off at a time, looking at one priority 1 and maybe a priority 3. So that's underway. Also working with our training unit and restructuring how we do training so that the training is more consistent around these areas in topics such as use of force, reviewing for safety checks, liability, what does the case law update say? So looking at developed training and other required trainings. And as I said, continuing to do compliance, because we're fully aware that you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. And what you inspect repeatedly will yield the best results.
Oh, I think that was my cue to hand it over to Chief Deputy Williams on the next portion. Thank you.
Thank you. This slide is just a representation, a visual representation of the shared accountability and responsibility model that the chief spoke to earlier when he talked about the department's strategic vision. As you can see, the goal is to foster collaboration among our partners, work together on our programs, our education, our treatment, and ultimately the goal is to ensure that we achieve better outcomes for our youth. Moving forward, we're looking forward to the creation of a LP Advisory Council. Chief Epps, would you like to speak more to that?
So we are in the process of doing the foundational work that needs to be done. The guidelines for the advisory group have been established. There's a written process on how the selections will be made. We will publicize that we are accepting applications. That will be advertised on our social media platforms. We're going to ask that the Probation Oversight Committee also advertise that we're taking applications on their website, as well as the Department of Youth Development. We're going to work with some of our stakeholders to see if they can pass flyers out and do postings at our facilities. Initially, we will be piloting our LP Advisory Council so that we can work out kinks, but ideally there will be a rollout to have an advisory council at Berry J, our East Camps, Kilpatrick, at all of the facilities. And there's also a draft application and there's a draft flyer. We're just pending final review and approval to do a couple of tweaks to those as recommended, and those will be issued soon. We anticipate that everything should be going out publicly probably the third week of June, and then we look forward to receiving the applications and forming a shared interview committee to help us select members of the advisory council.
Can I just jump in? I want to make sure we don't miss the purpose of this. It's certainly not because I lack a number of places from which to draw recommendations. Those come freely and daily. But I want to make sure that we're hitting all the appropriate folks that are invested in our young people. And we will continue to receive guidance from state agencies, from the POC, from the Inspector General when they put out reports. This is a much more personalized approach that I want to formalize to make sure that folks don't have to call into meetings like this. They don't have to call into for us to hear them. We don't have to count on them on an individualized basis, trying to make their voice heard at the facility itself, but that we're actually going to have a place in which we will hear them and seriously take into consideration what they believe areas of improvement are, and maybe what we've missed, the perspective of the young people and their families, and then we can take a serious look at how to implement those. So just want to formalize a place to get voices that we perhaps are missing.
Next, we're going to have the 30-day LP, Reinventing and Transforming the Culture. This is where we want to ensure that everyone has a consistent and standardized approach, not only for the youth, but also for our staff assigned there. We also want to talk about our classification changes that we're working with the Chief Executive Office on. We would like to convert our detention services officers to deputy probation officers. That way, when they come in, we have a single classification that allows for greater flexibility in terms of our ability to move them between the field and the juvenile institutions. Right now, the detention services officer is an item that's only allowed to work in our halls. They're not available in our camps nor in the field, and so we want to eliminate that barrier and, like I mentioned, have greater flexibility in our ability to use the staff that we have in our department. We also want to create a non-sworn probation-specific position. What we realized is that when we looked at our operations, there's certain work that doesn't necessarily need a peace officer badge to do that, and we need a place for our officers that do have particular work restrictions or inability to continue to work in the peace officer capacity, to have a place where we can place them in terms of continuing their work with the department. We also, as you know, because we are currently reassigning staff from the field, that is not a long-term sustainable strategy, so we want to develop a much more robust recruitment and training strategy. And so, as mentioned, we want to increase or invest in our staff by elevating our entry-level positions. We want to offer them the ability to get their bachelor's degree and have courses that obviously will assist them in doing the probation work on site with the department. Setting expectations going forward, our top priorities are BSCC and DOJ compliance. That remains our goal and where we are continuing to see the department going. We're looking to have greater transparency and better communication, not only with the board, our county partners, as well as our stakeholders, and there are more changes to come.
I just read it. Sounds like a threat. What we mean is we really hope to, for the next fiscal year, provide a 2-year strategic plan. And so many of the questions and really going in depth with things that we've only touched upon here have an actual document to guide all of us moving in the next 2 fiscal years. So that is the more to come.
Lastly, as part of the board motion, we were asked to address programming. So this here is a snapshot of some programming available at Barry J. Neidorff We're currently meeting internally once a week to develop a list of all of our current contracts that we have and the services that are provided. As you can see, we have the agency, the department, county department responsible if it's outside of probation, the funding source, a brief description of the services to be provided, and then how often it's being provided and to which units. What this does not reflect, and we're currently working on, is also including our education services department. They have a variety of activities and events that they do with the youth that is not reflected here. Either they do it in conjunction with LACO or they do it independently. And so we want to have that information available to you. What's also missing and we're working on is any pending or upcoming contracts that we're working through to get in place to increase the number of programming that you see here and available to the youth on site. We currently have funds available through the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant. That's our SB 823 funding that came down from the state for our SYTF population. We're working with a number of county departments and other agencies to increase the number of programming that we have on site there. In addition, with our Education Services Department, they are providing vocational training. They are providing higher institution learning. We have a relationship with Los Angeles Mission College for our SYTF population, and we also have a relationship with East LA College and LA Trade Tech. And so we have several youth that are participating, and I think we have about 3 youth that are planning to graduate with their associate degree coming up soon. So like I mentioned, this is a snapshot of Barry J, and then this is the same, similar information for Los Padrinos. Like I said, it's a work in progress, and so I hope to be able to provide that to the board and to others, a complete and comprehensive list of all programming currently available on site. Once we have that document prepared, we also want to look at any gaps that we may have, either either gender-related or age-related, to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of the youth in our care. And then, of course, we also want to make sure that we do some robust program evaluation to make sure that the programs that are in place are achieving the outcomes that were intended, and that, like the chief mentioned, that the youth that are in our care, that they leave better than they arrived. That concludes our presentation for item 12, I believe. And if I may, I would go on to item 11, the global plan. So our global plan has not changed since it was provided to the board back in October of 2023. This is a list of our current facilities and their planned use, the population that is housed there, the type of population, as well as the current count as of May 10th, 2024. The only change that you see here is that we did add Camp Page to the plan because we still currently have youth assigned there, but we are currently meeting internally when we have time and space to figure out to move forward with our planned use of temporarily closing Camp Page. We'll be working with Supervisor Barger's office to make sure that what we do is comfortable. But we'll be looking to either redistribute the population and or reduce the number of those that are currently being assigned to that camp. But these are our facilities and, like I mentioned, the current planned use for these sites. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Supervisor Hahn and I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to have a public-facing conversation around probation. We know that in recent months, a lot of what this board has discussed has been in closed session given the nature of the discussions, but we wanted to make sure that there was a space for the public to engage with that. So thank you for the presentations, and I'll now turn it to Supervisor Barger.
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation. Thank you, Chair Horvath, because to your point, we know what you're doing, but I don't think it's being communicated, and the BSCC acknowledging that we're in compliance speaks volumes to the work that you're doing. But I think it's important for us to let the public know. And, you know, Guillermo, I want to thank you for being transparent as it relates to the staff. I know yesterday you made an announcement in terms of staff that have been put on leave. I think that's important too, because accountability across the board needs to be in place. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to congratulate you on the fact that now you can interact with the BSCC. And I think that is important. I think that was a frustration in that you've got to be able to have that interaction with them. My question, I mean, on the advisory board, is that in conjunction or is that in addition to the joint ownership with county partners? Or is that the county partners that are going to be part of this advisory?
No, two separate things.
Two separate things.
So as envisioned, the county partners, as they are presented and
Yeah.
and accept, I'm getting ahead of some of the conversations with them, that would be day to day. That would really be envisioned as, no, day to day, we are working together and you have say over some of these areas. The advisory component is folks that aren't a formal part of our system or our county, and they are either experts in the space of youth justice or folks that have experience and family members or have been in the system.
So on the departments, are the public defenders going to be included?
Yes, not to go too deep into
No,
their.
but I just, because I think one of my, I mean,
Yeah.
I'll follow up with why I'm saying that is that you created a unit at Barry Nydorf for, for youth that want to go into a treatment program. And I understand that it got shut down because some lawyers felt that their clients were in there inappropriately. And I was a little disheartened by that because that unit was stood up because we had so many overdoses. And I had one of the young men beg me to put him someplace so that he wouldn't use. That unit was set up because of three overdoses in one weekend. And one youth said to me, I came in here clean, and now I'm addicted. So I want to make sure that all these county partners, including the public defender, are aware of why we do things and that there is a chain of command, because by closing that unit, it's a total disservice to those youth that by choice are in there. And I still, not for today, but I want to understand how youth that don't want to be in there are in there. I think that raises a whole different question. I think that's what the question was. But having said that, I just hope that we, as a county family, recognize, and you said it, Guillermo, and I've said it 100 times, it's not a question of if these youth are released, it's when. And if we don't invest in them now, they're going to get out, and they're not going to be pillars of society. They're going to be in a situation that I believe, as their de facto parents, we should be ashamed of. So I appreciate you saying that. And I think quality, we're in compliance, I think that's great, but I think quality of services is going to be the key. And I love that you said, now it's time to address the quality. And I think, again, having the county family at the table, because in talking to the youth, one of their frustrations was that sometimes part of our county family doesn't show up, teachers, and that is problematic. So it's important for us all to be accountable, because I know this board is taking that accountability, and it goes all the way down the chain of command, right? So I appreciate that. On the and I know all my colleagues want to speak, so I won't take too much more time, but so you talked about breaking the population into smaller units. Is that included in the department's master facility plan? Is that how, I mean, are you going to do it by pods, or how is that going to work? Because I'm concerned about shutting down Page if in fact you may need that to create those smaller, because once you shut down, it's hard to open up. So I just would like you to think about that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to address those. I'll go in reverse order. I'm not averse to pivoting when necessary, and so I think you'll notice that the reason Page is out is because the population increased. And we are not going to get stuck on, well, we made the decision and it was fiscally prudent and et cetera. Things changed. Things changed, and so we've had to adapt, keep it open because the population went up, and we want to make sure, oh, I apologize. I got it very excited. And we want to make sure that we have room out where to put young people outside of the most restrictive location, which is Los Padrinos. So losing capacity in those other elements is of concern to me. So your point is well taken. I have to address, and I don't know if there's a possibility for county council to not hear this next portion. Because you addressed the component of no longer being able to have the substance use disorder unit. I will say this, I think an error was made. Sometimes we do not agree that the correct legal action was taken, and we will move forward and we'll appeal and we'll do whatever we will have to, because from my perspective, that was an error. And so we'll continue to address that component of it.
And I appreciate that, again, this didn't come from bureaucracy, this came from youths within the facility that wanted a unit. And so I just feel very strongly about that.
And sometimes the devil's in the details.
Oh,
right?
always,
And maybe,
always.
and maybe the next run at it will take into consideration what the court has told us and the public defender.
Yeah.
But what I know for certain is that we will have a space for young people that are in the throes of drug addiction can be treated. That is one of our core responsibilities.
You mentioned call-outs. How are we doing on call-outs?
Well, I cannot tell a lie, and it is still at a level that is unacceptable, embarrassing to me personally. But there is improvement, and so fair is fair.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in a healthy place, but there is improvement.
So have you done a survey? Because I've talked to employees that are fearful that they're going to be held over, and they've got an important, fill it in, anniversary, birthday, baptism coming up, and their fear is that if they show up to work and they can't leave, that they're going to miss that, and so they call out. Have we done any sort of survey to find out if, in fact, that is, so that we can at least maybe put together like a registry, if you will, in those situations so that they can pull down if someone doesn't show up to work?
We've not done a survey, a formal survey. What I can tell you is that that is not the single reason why folks are calling out. I have taken great care last year to try to understand patterns of call-outs. And what I can tell you, they are diverse, they are hard to chase. We have tried overstaffing so that if things like that occur and there are call-outs, we still have sufficient staff. I just, I have to be very frank about this. There's a call-out culture, and regardless of the reasons, in an agency like this, it's simply not acceptable at the level. The level of call-outs is just something so extraordinary that exists nowhere else that I can't, I can't come before you and say that this is simply at the edges. Having said that, this has gone on so long. The good staff, the staff that go to work, understanding that it's at great peril and missing family, and they still go to work, they're exhausted. That's the component of wellness that I was speaking of before. We have to do better by them by having a formalized wellness, and it may be conversations with the union on different types of schedules so that they can have compressed schedules and have 3 days off. So that even though we need you to do those 16 hours, at least you can plan on having a 3 days off for wellness. It may be folks starting to honor. If I tell you 30 days in advance when your 16 hours are going to be, you cannot call out that day. So these will all be ongoing conversations. We have lost the faith of it's not just the public, but of our own staff. So part of this process has been to engaging in staff. Our staff feel like they've been abused, lied to. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And so part of it is also understanding that I have to invest in them as well.
And then in closing, and this is more of a statement than a question, I think I appreciate moving staff from field in, but I hope that it's not at the expense of the work that the adult supervision has in place. Just be cognizant of that. This is important, but I just want to make sure there's a balance because we do have oversight over adults that are on probation. That's it.
Okay.
Supervisor
you.
Solis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to Thank you, Chief Rosa and your team for the presentation. I'm excited that you have put together what appears to be a good plan, and I'm happy to hear that we're in compliance. But I'm also worried because it seems as though any little incident, if you aren't able to get all the staffing in an appropriate time when people are there or they look back at roles, that could trigger, I would imagine, right? That we're out of compliance? Is that not correct?
If you go back and hear well, maybe don't, the last hearing of BSCC, but it's unclear to us what process they would utilize. And so I suppose I would simply say that this is sort of a high wire in which we are sort of highly nervous to make sure that there isn't any sort of small, so you're correct about that, yes.
And I know some of that isn't, as we're talking right now, and completely under your control. I think the elephant in the room is working with labor and having those conversations, and how those discussions been coming along.
The conversation with labor is difficult because from the onset, some of the things that are necessary to get this department through and make it viable are just not what labor wants to hear. And by labor, I'm going to refer to the membership individually more than the entity. And so when you don't have good news to give people, that makes it very difficult to create a fantastic working relationship. And there are just some answers that they're having to accept that make that difficult. But what I will say this is that we do have members that are committed to this profession and this work.
Right.
Period. So come what may, they will be with us. We just have to make sure we do the right thing by them, but they're not looking for other work. This is the work that they chose and they believe in. Because we're in the middle of these profound changes, everyone is uncomfortable. Everyone is not in the best moment of their career, and it is tough to see the other side. I hope that beginning with this presentation and then really the 2-year roadmap or the 2-year, that folks can at least see, well, where are we headed permanently? Is there going to be a reprieve of me being moved around? Those type of things, which is where we haven't quite gotten with folks. But I have strong faith that labor believes in this work. They understand that we're not creating new problems. This has existed for years,
Right.
and that it is because of that it's so difficult. And in the end, they're committed to this, and we will work together to get there.
So I hope that at some point, and maybe you've already done this, is shared your plan with them in smaller groups or something, whatever that might mean, just so we're leveling with them. Mm-hmm. That this is a roadmap, but you also are offering up a lot of things here for them. The education, the training, maybe flexible hours to work and all that. And I don't know that that has really been made public. So all I'm saying is it could help, in my opinion. But I would say to you also that I think the action you took last week by placing 66 staff members on leave at the beginning of the year was bold, quite bold. And that, I'm certain, sends a message also to all employees that I hope not just you, but that we mean business as a board. Because I think a lot of us have really been troubled by the behavior and what is being reported by you, your department, but also in the newspapers and by children who are being represented now by attorneys. And there's a cost. We're having to pay that. The county is. And at some point, I would hope that that's the kind of conversation we need to have with everybody, because that has to stop. You're sending a signal clearly, but we need to have folks understand that we're all in this together. I mean, just as much as you may be the fingers pointing at you, they're pointing to this board. And they're also pointing to the employees that have to understand that there's a new, for lack of a better saying, a new sheriff in town.
There's also one of those.
A new sheriff in town with this department that means business and legally. And it's not malicious, because certainly the stories of things and the behavior of some of these staff is egregious. There's no place for that anywhere. And I've had discussions with people who represent these folks. And when I mentioned some of the cases, I've been told there's no place. Those people need to be out. So I agree with that. And I think we have to hold ourselves. And I think county council may be getting a little, is listening, but I would certainly think that we could continue to move in the direction that you feel appropriate. Because our priority has to be the safety, as you say, for these people, these young people that are in our charge, as well as their families, because no one gives their child up readily. There's a reason for all of this. And we need to make clear that while they're in our custody, that they are getting the best and excellent care that they can. But you're under a lot of strain. We know that. I know that. I don't want to go into too much, but I do want to say something that you touched on, programming. And you have a list of different groups now that you want to bring in. I can't tell you how urgent that need is. The last time I visited Los Padrinos, you started out with me and then you had to go do some other things, but I went into a classroom and it was a STEM classroom. And there were less than, I think, maybe 20 youngsters in there, and I think you had some female and you had staff in there. But I was quite taken in a positive light to see the faculty that were there, the staff, that could break down in smaller groups, little pods, maybe 3 and 4 students working on projects. And I'm not talking just about painting and scribbling and things like that, which is important. I'm talking about these young people were learning how to maneuver and develop drones using IT technology and putting together solar panels to heat the classroom. My God, where was ISD? If they came up with that, and for me, just to go in there and be able to meet with them and talk to them, quite frankly, gave me the sense that there is some hope here. And they were working on different projects. But one thing that became clear to me is that it doesn't happen for all the kids that are at Los Padrinos. And there may be some resentment that other kids that want to come in that classroom can't because of limitation. But there was also a limitation of resources. I asked the question, if you needed anything, what would it be? One youngster said, if we could purchase, his teacher said, if we could just purchase a solar panel, we could do many more things. And I said, what's the cost for a panel? $100. I said, hey, we'll buy it for you. I have yet to get any response back as to whether or not we can do that, but that shouldn't come out of my budget. That should come out of your budget. But all I'm saying is that there's an inquiry, there's a thirst from these kids. They're not all set up for failure here. And I was really very sympathetic to what I heard of the teachers that were there. And some of them have spent 25 or more years. So these are people that I know believe in their journey and what they're doing transformationally for these kids. And I want to see that magnified. So I totally believe in your concept. I just don't know how fast we're moving, CEO. Or maybe the direction the strike team has to be able to let our chief know how quickly he can readily utilize these resources. Because I kid you not, this young kid that I met, I forget his name, but he was already applying to colleges. They were seeking him. How many kids, 16 years old, know how to maneuver drones, electronics, IT? I mean, I can maybe count on one hand.
Supervisor, I'd just like to point out and remind the board, I think it was last October, there was a CEO board letter where the board actually delegated a lot of authority to probation to move in a more expedited fashion in terms of contracting, hiring, procurement, et cetera.
So what's the holdup there, Chief?
I appreciate your comments and insight. What I will say is that the good news is I think it's in DYD's budget and they can purchase the panel, but more importantly...
Panels.
Panels, oh, I'm sorry, multiple. No, what I would say is that at the beginning I spoke of moving forward. What's going to help this is an acknowledgement that this isn't a probation alone piece. And to think that probation alone is going to be able to expedite and bring in more programs, I think would be an erroneous way to move forward. And I hope this is the last presentation in which I'm addressing programming without our partners, that really, the future really should be myself and Director Carroll and some other county folks, because they, I'm tapping. I am saying they are better situated, and what has been holding all of this back is having an environment in which they could come in with the programming. We are now at a critical point in which we can now turn up the heat to bring in more of those programmings very quickly, but not just probation. There's an important reason for not just to be probation, because the selection of programs, the public's trust in those programs, et cetera, it really is time for us together with those other entities to do it.
I think Supervisor Barger asked the question about staffing. So just for a moment, how are we doing there at Camp Kilpatrick and Bear J? And is there a need to bring in someone to help you with planning, consultant, or have you done that?
I hope I don't regret saying this, I don't need more consultants. I need more staff. The real issue here is all the criticisms of, if I use the staff in this location, doesn't that mean I'm shorting in another location? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have finite resources, and being able to hire more staff at a faster pace than attrition is nearly impossible. The move forward is rethinking on sources and training of staff. And so part of what you'll see in the 2-year plan is we're exhausting competition with other law enforcement entities. We're exhausting competition with the folks that would normally come into probation because it means something in their life and they want to make a change. What we have to find are folks that would never want to come with probation and really have them see us differently and make a different space for them. So where we're hurting on staff is simply being able to reach out and get those people interested. On top of it, being in the news and all the negativity, who wants to go work at a place where folks are saying they may not be there next year? I think that we've hit that tipping point in which folks realize, no, we're going to be successful. These facilities aren't going to be closed down. Now we're on improvement. How do we want them to look? What do we want them to do in the short term? So in terms of staffing, we absolutely, we are ready to run as many academies as people that we can find. We did hire a company to help us with strategies at a much larger pace and bring folks in. But there are some things that we're doing that we're on the cusp of with the DPO2s, LCSWs, and rethinking some of the non-sworn staff where we just need more people, and we're going to have to reimagine who that is that we're bringing in.
I think union folk would probably be open to a lot of that, to be honest. One thing I did want to raise is the girls' decarceration initiative that I had put forward. You have, according to this chart, about 46 girls in our custody? And they're scattered amongst maybe 3 little institutions. So what's our plan to bring them all together? We talked about this before, in cottages, a smaller setting or something. So what are your thoughts on that?
I knew I had made a mistake earlier because I said I don't need any more consultants, but I've got a consultant that by the end of summer is going to be making a recommendation on where and how to exactly consolidate the young girls so that we could have targeted programming for them, not have them scattered.
Right.
And so that's a paper that's being worked on by, an outside academic entity to give us a very specific.
How soon can that happen? Because it's such a small population. I mean, realistically?
If you give me an opportunity to give you a correct answer, I'll get back to you. Yeah.
Okay, and just last comment or question here is, we had talked often about medical services and the fact that there are issues regarding transportation of our youth to medical facilities, General Hospital being one, or having appropriate staff accompany youth to their medical appointments. And we talked about, was there any local hospitals or clinics that you could contract with so that services could be readily available in the vicinity of, say, Los Padrinos? since that's where you have a larger cohort of people.
I hope you'll understand that this particular issue is part of our DOJ civil case, and we have some answers due to them on this specifically that I think would be better served if I.
Talk to us privately, okay.
Yes.
But it is on your mind, as
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
on our mind,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, with that, Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief and your staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and agree with comments that my colleagues have made. I want to thank you, Chief, and your team, not only for the presentation, but we are clear and must acknowledge that it was an absolute Herculean effort to pass BSCC inspection, and so I want to acknowledge that. And there's no question that a tremendous amount of work remains to make sure we build on and really sustain those gains. We don't want to backslide, if you will. I know it took effort to start really the reversal of a decades old culture, and that really can't be overstated. So I want to acknowledge that. And it's clear to me that what contributes to that success really is having you and a leadership team that speaks clearly and publicly and confidently out against abuse. And so I want to acknowledge the courage that took, the real leadership chops that took, and express my appreciation as well. As well as your consistent refrain today and your last comment about the interdepartmental effort it's going to take to really provide the kinds of services we all envision and would hope for our own children who are in need of support and engagement. And so I agree. I hope the next time that there are other departments there, owning their piece of the overall solution to the challenge that everyone has articulated. So I thank you for that. I want to so thank you. I want to transition into a couple of questions and comments. When a significant number of the young people who really spend a minimal amount of time in the hall, when I look at what that number is, it really calls to question and makes me think that we have to rethink whether those youth should have been there in the first place. That also then takes me to the issue of racial disparities and disproportionality in your population. And again, it requires, I think, a more critical look at how and why each youth is booked in the first place. I raise that issue and always will. The Probation Oversight Commission's data finds that 37% of the youth in the halls are Black, compared to 7% of the county's young adult, youth Black population. The irony for me, in the same meeting where we heard Supervisor Hahn expressing a concern about us figuring out a way how we stem the tide into homelessness, she identified the increasing number entering Skid Row. We saw the data from our department on the disproportionality of race among those who are on Skid Row, 58%. So that is a very dangerous through line. We talk about why we can't stem the tide when we look at who they are, and then we look at who's in the hall. And we know the correlation between being systems impacted and how that impacts you throughout the course of your life. That's why I continue and will always raise the issue of disproportionality, because we can't be confused about why is 50% of the population on Skid Row is Black when we didn't talk about or address the issue earlier, when we had the opportunity for real meaningful intervention and calling out disparities and truly wanting to honor our commitment to equity investments based on the data that we have available to us here in the county. So with that, acknowledging that dangerous, very obvious to me at least, through line, Can you talk to us about the reason for this disparity and what you think we can do to reduce the negative impact on Black youth in our juvenile justice system?
Supervisor Mitchell, that is that's heavy. I will say it is never lost on us or me when I visit with our young people. They look like me, just healthier, thinner, younger. That's not lost on, I know, anyone on my team. And we certainly don't want to be part of institutionalized racism that has profound impact on not just the young people, everybody in the system that touches probation. Where I have difficulty is that it's almost backwards. By the time we touch them, America has failed. It is everything leading up to, and we are then trying to make a course correction so far down the line, and on top of it, not even with all of the tools to address it. So the issues of access to healthcare, the issues of education, the issues of labeling, all of those things occur generally in a very profound way before they arrive at our doorstep. And then to try to undo with some limited tools that component of it, it's almost, can we do some of that so that they're not in the system with us? That's not to say that we're not going to continue to explore, because now we're faced with, one, what is our treatment of people with that background in mind? How are we preparing them so when they leave here, they don't return? But again, it's undoing all of the inequities that have occurred before they've arrived to us. That's difficult, especially in a department in which the Los Angeles County has by and large said you are not going to be the early intervention department, where we've said we don't believe that you're the best suited to be doing the interventions in school, where we don't believe you're the, becomes difficult because we believe we are a core part of it. But I think we get there in time by what we do now and by the trust that we regain, because that was the core of probation, to try. This is the opportunity to keep people from continuing down this line. This is a tough one. This is a tough one because we're sort of on our heels by the time that we're confronted with it. The population has already been determined by the time they arrive with us, and some of them with very specific orders that they will be detained and outside of our authority to release. So we're really chasing two things. One of them is correctly identifying the areas in which we can have impact. And then the second, which I don't think we've done, making policy recommendations where it's not currently within our power, but saying we too view this. Here are some suggestions on what to do. We've not really engaged in that in a meaningful way, and we hope to. So, to be just much more concrete, Chief Epps is engaged in additional efforts, both with POC and the DA's office, in seeing what group do we have at the onset that we could either get to release or not accept that isn't really currently part of our process. So initially, I will say that work is underway, but there's just so much more, right, that that we need to address when it comes to transition programs.
I really appreciate your thoughtful response, and agree with you that it's not just you to solve for, but all of us. So thank you for that. Long-term staffing plan. I appreciate the distinction you made in responding to Supervisor Solis's question about the workforce and their organized labor entity. I appreciate that. You know, what struck me, I found it curious, and I'm curious about how other counties who have both adult and juvenile probation under the single department, was the resistance that you've talked about that I've certainly experienced when I've encountered probation employees who've reached out to me, who stopped me at Costco, um, is this notion of being reassigned from the field. And I'm curious because it is all housed under one department. You know, when folks are hired in the department, you know, what is their expectation? It may not be relevant, but the example occurred to me. We hear from the sheriff that once people leave the sheriff's academy, they typically are assigned at the jails first, and that there is an intentional rotation throughout all of the areas that the sheriff's department has oversight of. So if you're hired into a probation department that has both juvenile and adult, you know, this resistance, this notion that I'm in the field and that's where I must stay. You know, I know, albeit anecdotally and personally, a number of people who've had full careers of probation who've gone from both adult to juvenile. So what are people told when they're hired? You will work adult exclusive, and so you should never be expected to work in another area that your department has within this jurisdiction. We're not asking people to uh, work in park and rec or to be lifeguards. We're asking them to work within the confines of their department, supporting juveniles in institutions versus adults in the field. So can you help me understand?
I don't know if I can, but I cannot believe you've given me this opportunity, and I'm going to try to be brief because this is one of the areas that bothers me the most. From my perspective, I'm not talking about classifications, I'm just giving you my perspective on what probation is and what a probation officer is. There is no such thing as a juvenile or adult probation officers. Probation officers deal with families and networks of care. So whether the identified client before you is an adult or a juvenile is largely irrelevant. Because if you're working with juveniles, you're working with their adult family. And if you have an adult client, you're working with the entire family. So from my perspective, there is no such thing. Probation officers are trained and prepared to deal with the entire family unit and really following family dynamics. So it is absurd to me when I hear some of the, I work with this population or that population. You don't. We work with everybody. But what I will say is that it's maybe a stand-in for a few other things that have occurred over the years. One of them being the subculture, and in some ways the reality that you promote to the field, that the opportunities and the classifications are of a higher pay, or maybe even regarded as differently when you move to the field. So that moving in the other direction, even if incorrect, is perceived as backtracking in one's career. I've earned my way to a different assignment. The second is, whether perceived or real, that what you're telling me to do is now go confront more danger. And so I've either been there, done that. I now have progressed in my career, and I work this assignment in which I haven't placed handcuffs on someone. Just as that this is much more dangerous. No one has tried to spit at me or do any of this for 20 years. And you're asking me to now move into that space. I no longer feel prepared or willing to do it, is something very real that I've been talking to staff directly about. There is no assignment in which you're a peace officer, and anyone should guarantee you that you will never have to do those things. Now, we're not doing this for fun. This isn't because I want to destabilize or send you somewhere. It's out of necessity. And that the exchange for carrying that badge is that you're prepared to, when needed, and this is a need, not a want, go do that work. And I think moving forward, that's going to be much more clear, and most of the staff that I speak with understand that. Their question is, how could this all of a sudden shift? And that's a fair question. How is it that for 30 years, that was not the understanding of the department or the unit, and then now all of a sudden? That's a fair question. But what I will say is I can only lean on what I know a peace officer must be able to do, and I absolutely know the need that we have, and I also know that there's no one else coming in to save the day. It is only the staff that we have that can do it.
Thank you very much for that. Madam Chair, just two more points. The probation's budget. It feels counterintuitive that we've got shrinking number of people within your jurisdiction. The number of incarcerated youth has steadily decreased, along with the number of youth and adults on field probation, and yet the department's budget increases. So is it a realistic or even appropriate to assume or to expect cost savings as a result of the shrinking population, given also the BSCC challenges and all that you're having to do to get us compliant and meeting the needs of your clients in an appropriate way? Is that an appropriate expectation? Shrinking population, therefore the budget should shrink too.
Why so many tough questions? Not even one softball one. Here's what I would say.
You know me.
Here's what I would say. If we were doing a fantastic job and people loved the work we were doing, that question would sort of take care of itself. I would come to you and I say, well, we're doing more. You're right, the population went down, and the way that we adjusted is we provided more services. What I'll tell you is that one consideration in the short term is that while the population has gone down, areas where we've had to spend money is of an emergency nature. So for example, if we're going through shortages, the amount of overtime being spent is beyond a healthy level out of necessity. If we have multiple challenges in court, it means those expenditures are beyond what one would account for in a normal, healthy budget. And that even in being in that environment doesn't allow to actually point out to where there have been some cost savings because we're moving it over to these temporary areas in the short term. So I think it would be natural to expect that as there is significant population decreases, that there would be some cost savings. The question would be, do you then use that money for things that were deferred before? Mm-hmm. Do you change the nature of what you produce? Like, I'll give you an example that I think is easy for everyone to understand, just sort of intuitively. It may be that the formula that we use for supervising adults was out of necessity, that as the population goes down, then we have to right size to the type of supervision that needs to take place, following best practices, and something you weren't able to do before.
Got it.
And so I think that this budget in particular, we have to, now when we're going to go into a moment of more stability, then take a look at all of the different areas and see what we can do. What I should have said is I should have turned it over to Chief Deputy Williams, our money person, and she would have probably given you a much more.
No, but if you have anything you want to add, because.
Thank you, Chief. So in looking at our budget over the last 5 years, the bulk of the increases that you do see with respect to net county costs are associated with cost of living adjustments. Mm-hmm. So it's basically paying more for the same and existing staff that we do have available. In addition, we have lost approximately about 600 staff during the past 5 years, either during curtailments due to the pandemic or due to other changes. And so like the Chief mentioned, while we may have some savings or reductions in services and needs in other areas, what we are finding as we're doing our operational assessment is that we are shortchanging ourselves in other areas, i.e. Internal affairs. We're currently working with the CEO to address some changes in that area that may cost us more than what we had traditionally been paying for that operation. We need to strengthen training, as Chief Epps mentioned earlier. We need to look at our policy and procedure unit, which isn't actually a real unit. We borrowed positions from other areas, so we actually need to build that up. We need to strengthen our communication unit because it's not solid where it needs to be. So while we may reduce resources in other areas, we may need to shore up other areas. So we are currently working on a reorganizational plan with the CEO's office that we'll be providing to the board. Thank you.
Very helpful, thank you. Last point, Madam Chair, here's your softball. On this chart, it would be helpful to me to know what the capacity is for all of these facilities. Because as I think about costs, I'm like, those big old camps with 24 people in it, wow. We're not gonna score any savings there because, unless you can mothball an entire facility, it's a moot point. And so that would be helpful just for me, an additional column for future presentations. And also because folks, around town are looking at these properties going like, ooh, they're closed. Are they gonna stay closed? I happened to be at an event with the LAUSD board member this week who had toured some of our camps and said, and then, Supervisor Mitchell, they're closed. We sure could use that property for A, B, and C reasons. So, I think we should just know that people have their eyes on these assets. And we have our eyes on these assets for different reasons. I'm looking at my colleagues over there who've been talking about that. So we should just be mindful, as you develop your long-term strategy about how those county assets could be used in different, more current ways, I guess I'd say. And again, not only locally, you were visited just this week by a county commissioner from Harris County who toured Barry J. Nidar, looking at how they can build out their own SYTF facilities in Houston. So I know that while we feel like, the BSCC's got us in a vice grip, we do have assets, we do have opportunity, we do have a reputation that others are looking at in a positive light as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to hear today's presentation. It was very informative. My ask would be if we could add that additional column just so at least I have a context in which to even understand the relevance of those numbers as well as the budget conversation. And congratulations again, and know that we will continue to provide the support that we can to continue on this turn of events and direction for this department.
Supervisor Hahn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for all these very thoughtful and deliberative insights and questions and thought-provoking answers that we're getting. Yeah, some of us had our sights on Los Padrinos. I had renderings. I had a whole nother use for that. But I was thinking, Guillermo, sitting here remembering the opening day of Los Padrinos was that 2 years ago maybe, and we sat there and there was so much hope and there was so much willingness from partners, the city. Everyone really felt like there was such promise, and it's actually good to see that you still kind of have maintained that hope and that vision on what it can be, what it should be. And I appreciate your comments, which some of my colleagues have also commented on, that it's really about the quality of care now, because it feels like, for years we have been focused on, this suitability issue, and we have put so much resources and time and effort and closed session hours talking about being in compliance. And now while that, which by the way, nothing else really mattered unless we met those standards. We could have all the dreams in the world about what we wanted to do, but if the BSCC was not going to work with us and was going to deem us, unsuitable, then it really hampered what we believe our probation department should look like, act like, behave like, and what the promise is for these young people. So good news that we're in compliance, and we're going to be paying very close attention, and more than paying attention, I think you've heard from this board a real commitment to making sure that we provide, as well as I'm sure you've heard from our CEO and other departments, we want you to stay in compliance and remain suitable, and we'll do whatever we can to support that. But it does feel like, feels good thinking that maybe we can focus on something else now and focus on the quality of care and what we actually can provide. For some of those young people, it's not that long that they're, in Los Padrinos, for instance. Some of them are not there long term, so we have a very limited time to even, impact them or affect them. So the programming is so important, and I think we've all been talking about it a long time. And that was just a snapshot. It was a few programs. I think part of what I've been hearing, I wonder if you could address this, since programming is still part of the suitability and compliance criteria. I heard from a probation oversight commissioner that when they went out there and looked at the schedule for programming, that certain things were supposed to be happening, and yet they found out they weren't. So it's great to see the list of programming and what should be happening at different times and who the partner is. But if there's some reason it's not happening, then that becomes a problem. What would you tell us that maybe is more likely than not reasons for the scheduled programming not actually happening when it's intended to?
Well, I can't speak to that specifically, meaning that incident. I can give some insight as to what has occurred over the last few months and this is one of those areas where we hurt ourselves. So from my perspective, we've not been out of compliance for not providing sufficient programming. What has really occurred is that we've not correctly kept track of the programming that takes place. Our practices and our policies have really been inappropriate in the sense that, for example, I know of many instances in which a scheduled program, the provider came in at a different hour, and we just allowed them to go ahead and do it early. That doesn't mean that programming didn't take place. It means that if you were to arrive on the scheduled time, you would think that programming didn't take place. Additionally, the way that we were keeping track of programming didn't give us credit because of sign-ins and all sorts of. So what I would say is that the minimum level of programming has taken place. Were we accounting for it properly and in a way that we could show? That is now taking place. But I have to make another comment because I drive my team crazy with this. I take no pride in meeting minimum standards. That's not the place where I seek to live or be the head of an agency. That is sort of, that bar is so low that I don't want anyone to believe that that is what we are attempting to do here in probation. That is simply minimum standards.
Right.
The things that we discussed earlier today, the types of programming according to individualized needs, that exceeds. That's our goal. That's when we know
Right.
we're being successful and having impact on young
Right.
people.
It's clear that compliance is just the floor.
Right.
And I think we all agree that's the bare minimum, and the young people in our care need so much more than that. So I appreciate you acknowledging that that's the floor.
Earlier on, we also had folks that, because of incidents in the facility, would say, no, I can't. There was an incident with one of the providers. You can't go back in. And so that was also making it difficult for us to be able to, it was on schedule, something occurred, had to be canceled, or the provider wouldn't go in.
Let me ask how often that you maybe go to the Oversight Commission. Do you do regular appearances there, or only when
Absolutely.
summoned? Because this would be something, again, since I heard that from an Oversight Commissioner,
Yeah.
it felt to me the way it was reported to my office that what you're saying has not been communicated to them.
I I can neither attest the veracity of comments made by members of the Oversight Commission, nor that I could have an impact on their opinion when sharing these things. But to answer your question,
I think you could, I would say you could have an impact on their
good.
Opinions.
I'm glad. Oh, okay. I'll take it.
Okay.
And rather than answering your question is I'm due another visit
Okay.
at the next meeting.
Right. And very least, I'm glad I'm hearing this because now when it's reported to me, I can certainly possibly give some explanations. But you could do a much better job. I was fascinated by the slide about the 30-day Los Padrinos reinventing, transforming the culture. Curious to know what culture you're trying to transform. Is it the staff? Is it the youth? Is it both?
It's the expectation of everyone that goes into a unit as to what we're doing here, how we speak to each other, what consequences mean. And so this isn't targeted at staff. It isn't targeted at kids. It is an acknowledgement because there has been certain activities and being short-staffed and lack of programming, that the only way to turn this around is to be very public about it and have everyone say, look, these are the things and the ways we interact with each other. Even more importantly, we're dealing with young people. These are the consequences. This is what you can expect for this behavior. And staff, this is how you're expected to respond to the behavior. And say, I know that folks adjust to the expectations of them. And I'm talking about everyone in those units. And so you'll hear more about this, but this will be a series of very public activities and changes. And I believe that 30 days, maybe we have to extend it to 60 days later.
I was going to say, I don't think you're going to transform the culture in 30 days.
That's how hopeful I am, that you will see a marked difference after, let's say it's 90 days. But I know that if we take the example of education, you know that the expectations of the student adjust to the teacher. You just know it. You know it in the negative when a substitute teacher is present. Part of the same psychology and adjustment to expectations is what we have to do. Young people, when they go through reception, adjust to what they see in the unit. And we have to do a very public, very targeted for everybody to understand whatever has happened here before, this is what is going to happen moving forward.
And in terms of the training, right, or particularly for new staff, you talked a little bit earlier about, well, this is all about culture, right? This is all about expectations. What else are you focusing on? Because again, staffing is such a problem to support these new hires and make sure they don't leave.
So it'll be a series of interventions such as formulating a field training officer program, which means that when you finish the academy, you actually have a very specific 10 weeks of shadowing and doing activities in which you take on progressively more responsibility. And that's a safety net for folks, especially when they're going into a foreign environment that could be scary because you don't know what to do, that can be challenging. So having an FTO program for the facilities is going to be incredibly supportive for new staff. The other one is utilizing the classification of Probation Officer 3, which is a training officer specifically dedicated to training. We've been talking about it for some time, and we're now, again, poised to release those items and hire actual training officers that can help in this. Those are just two interventions to help support those new hires.
Well, again, I know when we first hired you, right, you certainly came with some great expectations for the department and hopes and dreams, and yet we've really been mired in the BSCC. I forget how Supervisor Mitchell characterized it, having a vice, a hold on us. Yes. a vice grip. So hopefully, your compliance team, and that was one thing I forgot to ask was who is on the compliance team? Is it just probation staff, or is there anybody from oversight on that?
Oh, no, it's probation staff with the addition of designated counsel.
Okay. Hopefully, again, we can, get beyond that, stay compliant, and then, work with us to continue to promote what I think this board has made very clear in terms of what our ideals are for the young people that are within our care.
If I may, I appreciate your comments. It is, I know I use this term too much, it is not lost on me that Los Padrinos in particular has been a challenge. It's tough to go on this road with us under those circumstances. But, you mentioned that opening in Los Padrinos at what we intended to do. I just want to publicly say we were right then. That is what we're going to do. It is unfortunate that because we had to, out of necessity, the speed with which we moved, any professional in this area would have said, look, you are setting yourself up for failure, but it was out of necessity. There really was no option. And so it has taken us a few steps back, but we're returning to that vision.
Thank you very much for being here. I think we've all seen that this discussion has been well worth it, and thank you for all that you have shared. We're talking about two different items, so I'm going to start on the BSCC compliance piece. I appreciate you acknowledging that compliance is the floor, and I think we would all agree. And I also want to restate, as my colleagues have, it sounds like you came in at rock bottom. So to get to compliance took a lot. For you to say that you need to work on a 2-year document to guide your plans going forward suggests to me there wasn't one for you to pick up when you came in, that there wasn't any sort of guide, there wasn't any sort of vision. So it isn't as if you stepped into a role where somebody who wasn't doing it well left and you had an infrastructure. It doesn't even sound like you had infrastructure to walk into. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, I can make this comment. I thought I walked into rock bottom, and then we went back a couple more steps initially. So it is difficult to move forward with a vision that you may have when we know what the right thing is. We know what it looks like to provide good probation services and then have these other challenges. And then more specifically to your question, I really can't comment on prior administrations, but this is what I can say, is that what we needed to do to get to this place was certainly different than the direction that we're already headed.
And adding to that, your commentary around 30 years of a broken culture, acknowledgement that this isn't something that happened overnight or even in the past handful of years, but this has been generations of brokenness within the department, I think is important for us all to clearly understand. And thank you for your candor, because I think it's, as we are sometimes in the position of being in conversations with the BSCC or the DOJ, and we have to represent, the county is represented by our council in a certain posture. The truth is, none of us wants to defend behavior that we are not proud of. And so I think just your honesty about that here, I think is helpful in getting to what you said your ultimate goal is in terms of public trust. You mentioned that a chief compliance officer was suggested as a means by which you maintain compliance. Can you help me understand exactly how that will maintain compliance?
I think that in all large organizations, private and public, having a dedicated compliance team that, this is an actual field, and people get certified and they learn best practices, that this isn't simply something you do on the side or you do temporarily because of a lawsuit, that in fact it is part of the structure of keeping a healthy organization. That is the backbone that we're now creating, that we don't have a compliance team that is simply here because we were out of compliance with BSCC or because we're with DOJ, negotiated settlement, but because in order to know that you have a healthy department and maintain a healthy department, that you have to have a compliance team that is free from the regular structure, that reports only to the board or the head of the agency, and that has specific skills when it has to do with, that is separate than what is normally within probation. And so as we move forward, it is to actually train a compliance team that understands good auditing practices, that understand a whole host of things that aren't typically within simply moving a probation officer and asking them to do compliance. And so having that as a permanent structure, reporting to the top, having independence, and understanding that today it'll be this issue, but tomorrow they're going to be doing some predictive work to keeping us out of trouble is necessary.
I think it was Chief Deputy Epps, but I don't remember exactly. Someone used the phrase that there were glitches in documentation, or there may be ongoing glitches in documentation. Can you help me understand what that means?
So when there's a problem with the guard one, for example, when you're doing safety checks, you have to do your safety check, you mark a kid in the room or out of the room. So whenever there's an instance where something's missed or not marked out properly, we're required to do a special incident report. So some of those had been done, but they had not been uploaded where compliance could readily see them. So reporting that or having those available.
Okay, so it's maybe a documentation issue. It's not a technology issue. It's not a infrastructure. It's
Just those
something
types
different.
of things. So things that you have to continually monitor, train, and make sure that you're watching.
Okay, so there's a system in place for it, though?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last piece on the BSCC part, the staffing challenge we've nearly exhausted as a topic today. And I think acknowledging all of what you are trying to do to bring staff into a place where they can be successful in this role is important. And I also heard you acknowledge that different kinds of skill sets would help you be more successful to not only achieve compliance, but ultimately the vision where we want to go. Can you help me understand a little bit more about how you see those working together?
It's really three areas. One, acknowledging that the staff that I have is exhausted and they need to see a vision and understand what their role is in the department. That goes a long way in terms of folks engaging. As you can imagine, the work that we do is about interactions with people who are in the, and I've used this term before, sort of in the worst time and place in their life. Already the most challenging person to deal with. If on top of that, I'm asking you to go there when you are missing, when you don't know who's taking care of your own child, because I have completely changed your schedule, you could see how we're already setting ourselves up for failure. So one of them, one priority is engaging our own staff to slowly help them share in a vision as to how this isn't a permanent circumstance for you, and how I do need you, and refocus on, but when you're here, the engaging with the client. That's one, because we need to keep the folks that we have. The second is in who we're recruiting and how we're training them. For a department this size, the type of training that we have been providing is wholly insufficient and really not up to par with the demands of what we're asking folks to do. Even what I described before, being prepared to deal with the entire family unit. Have we formally trained our folks in family dynamics? Have we formally trained folks in SUD more than simply a 2-hour course that's mandatory? Or have we done our part on preparing them to deal with the clients that we have and what they may need? Have we trained folks in understanding that sometimes their role is not to provide the services, but to identify the need and get those resources for folks? Traditional probation work in the field but we're moving folks around. So part of it is investing and having training that focuses on what we're providing people when they're coming in, and then how are we maintaining them for the next 20 years to make sure that perishable skills beyond the minimum standards of simply doing a legal update. And I actually think that because we're Los Angeles County, and we can absolutely be a model and a leader for the rest of the United States, that reimagining what training means, that if I tell you that simply providing someone 10 weeks of training is now going to allow them to be able to have a profound impact on folks in our system, I mean, you would tell me that that's insane. So minimally, we're in Los Angeles County. We have some of the brightest academics in the world here, and to not engage them in helping us prepare our folks and allow opportunity for our folks to voluntarily participate in these programs that would be maybe more difficult and longer than they would, because it's tied to what we want to see from them. It's tied to what's going to help them be successful and promote in our system, is going to go a long way, I think, in not just recruiting folks, but keeping folks and helping them be able to sort of progress, see their life and progression with us. And then the last is just understanding that it is not an affront to probation to say, I need someone non-probation to be in here with me. That doesn't mean we're not needed. That doesn't mean I don't need a probation officer. It means that if I acknowledge that a unit has 90% of the young people on psychotropic medications, then it may be wise to have a team that has other perspectives and training. That doesn't mean I don't need a probation officer. It means I need a probation officer plus a licensed clinician. And the sooner we cross that barrier and just understand that we need to work together as a team, I think the more successful we'll be.
I think it's helpful for you to address that. Last year, we received a board letter that I think caused a lot of concern, because there was suggestion that potentially, for example, different kinds of law enforcement personnel might be coming into the facilities, and there was a belief that we were creating an even more carceral sort of situation for our young people. And what I hear you saying is the exact opposite. We need people who are just there to keep the building safe so other people can come in and do the programming, but we are wholly transforming how we envision the role of our staff in this space. And yes, there may be partners with a mental health, for example, to your reference, with a mental health skill set, but we also don't expect people to just be guards at doors. Right. And I think that's important too, because we were at a place where we were trying to secure a building to ensure our young people could go to school, that teachers could come in and be safe, that program providers would be safe, and there were lots of concerns about safety. And I want to make sure that we aren't training people just to guard doors, but to truly create an enriching environment. And so then moving to the broader vision, just a couple of things I wanted to touch on. Your report highlighted male and female young people, but I know we have TGI youth, and some of whom have had traumatic experiences because there isn't a space well equipped to address their specific needs. So how are you envisioning the future of any facility to ensure that our TGI youth are not traumatized because of their identity?
Thank you for pointing out that oversight. It's interesting because I think just before we walked out here, was having a conversation on policy. And there is a lens by which we need to review all our policy. One of them is on, because we make these adjustments in either our belief system or our approach. And rarely do we go back and say, I need to review everything that's come before. To make sure that it is now in line with how we're proceeding. That's one of them. And it's not just for folks in our care, it's for our staff as well. Is the entire environment Are we on the same page with respect to making accommodations for people, allowing people to define themselves, and how that's not an affront to our system? That's not a necessity for us to have to identify you, but knowing how to respond. We're at our infancy there. We do make accommodations already. So that is already part of sort of these.
At every facility?
No, I'd have to go back. I think that we've not confronted it at every facility. But to your point, maybe because we haven't made the space, right? Sometimes we make adjustments when we're confronted with it, but not of every facility. Good point.
So I would just offer cultural competency as part of the training that your staff is going to do to ensure that the various and diverse needs of the young people you're serving are matched with people who are equipped for them and who look like them, and all of that to sort of build on the previous point about the diversity of the young people who are entrusted to us. In your response to the decarceration of girls, I heard consolidation, but I didn't hear decarceration. And so I just would encourage you to look at what those plans have been. I think there are multiple motions that have addressed this issue, and making sure that we are making progress on that is something we are going to continue to focus on. So I appreciate that we're looking at how we can better serve the girls in our care by consolidating them into a facility that may be better suited for them specifically. And the point is that for any of the young women who can be released, whether it's through participation of DA or however we get to that conversation, to your point about partners, all of that is within our control. And so I want to make sure that we're using all of our partners to the best of our ability to ensure that any of our young people are leaving if that is an appropriate option for them to go somewhere else. I would also say we continue to get reports about OC spray, which is something that this board has been very clear about not wanting to see used in our facilities. So just to state it for the record, I think we continue to hold that position, and so that needs to be a goal that is actively achieved. I would say I would echo my colleagues' comments around the accountability for staff. I know that when the report came out about what has been characterized as a fight club happening at one of our facilities, you were very quick to engage the appropriate authorities to investigate, and in so doing, skipped past an opportunity to hold a press conference or sort of have a public communication about it to preserve the investigation and all of its components. And I know it was your desire to do so. So can you help me understand on a going forward basis? I know we've seen examples for, the sheriff last year took the opportunity to call out a situation in advance of how it all was going to play out. How are you going to change or modify communication, or maybe you won't, around all of these issues to ensure that we are communicating with the public about accountability measures? Because to your point, we hear a lot in the headlines about things that are not going well. We don't hear a lot about how we are proactively addressing those issues.
I'm going to do my best to be as transparent as possible. I think it's my responsibility, and the people of Los Angeles County have an entitlement to know what is happening. I also have a responsibility when it comes to having criminal investigations to, before anything else, preserve that investigation. Justice is not served if I botch an investigation because I would like to be recognized as having identified it. I will take the risk of being perceived as not being forthright to preserve that. Ultimately, the victims deserve a proper investigation, and employees deserve proper investigations that don't get ahead in making conclusions. It's particularly difficult if we're not the primary investigating agency. And I think that's where maybe we differ from some of the other entities that you mentioned. If I'm conducting the investigation, I know exactly at what flexion point I can say something because my agency conducting the investigation. I know if I've preserved interviews, I know if employees have been noticed, I know where we are with respect to POPAR rights. But in an attempt to be even more transparent and have another entity conduct an independent investigation, it reduces my ability to share because out of respect for what they're doing, which I don't know, I have to be very careful to. I mean, could you imagine you hand something over to an external agency so that they can conduct an independent investigation, and then I get ahead of them and identify people or identify MOs or anything else. So it's sort of incredibly difficult to have both things. But I am keenly aware that folks want to know what's happening to make sure that we're serious about this and they're not condoning or hiding misbehavior. And we're doing that. No one's doing that for us. That's our responsibility. While at the same time preserving, investigating. Nothing's more important, especially for the victim, that you maintain the integrity of the investigation.
And you said that criminal prosecution is on the table. Is that something that you've pursued at this time?
So I can't speak on any of these cases in particular, but the question is the pursuing.
Generally, has that happened?
Yes.
Okay. I think that those things are important to hear, and I appreciate the nuance with which you have to move in order to preserve the investigation. And if we didn't have examples of what appear to us as similar and communicating about it, I think people wouldn't ask this kind of question. So it's helpful to hear, because this investigation is happening outside of your department, that it changes the dynamic in terms of what you're able to say. I still think to the extent that you can find a way to communicate something with the public, that also goes to public trust and seeing that the department is in a different posture as it relates to this kind of behavior. I'm clear from your presentation that's what's happening. I'm clear from conversations we've had before today that that's happening. I'm not sure the public is clear about that. And so I think this conversation was important for that reason, and on an ongoing basis, finding elements to communicate to the public will continue to build trust in that regard and make sure that the kind of accountability that we're looking to have in the department, given the 30-year track record, is now something that becomes part of the new culture. I think I'm going to leave it there for now. We've covered a lot, and I thank you all for the work that you're doing to make sure that we are not only in compliance, but actually realizing our Youth Justice Reimagined. I guess I will say one last thing, that Campus Kilpatrick has been spoken about as sort of the model in which the direction of Los Angeles County, that's where we want to move. So would you maintain that that's still the goal? Is that something we are looking to either build out or recreate at other locations? Can we understand sort of the role that location plays with the broader Youth Justice Reimagined vision that we're trying to achieve?
I think it's a fantastic example of small community with a specific goal. It's exactly what we want to expand, with the caveat that we have different populations. And that's not going to be the precise model for all our populations, but that it has some bones about it that really are going to translate to the rest. Just sort of with the nuance that every community that we create will have some commonality. They're small, they have programming that's specific to it, but then depending on the trauma that we're trying to approach, where they are in terms of their release, they'll have different focus. One might be SUD, one might be vocational training, one might be trauma. So there may be different focuses that are going to require different modalities, different types of, maybe even the type of staff. But that is a fantastic model that Los Angeles should be proud of, and that it's in line of how we want to expand in terms of all our locations. Yeah.
In terms of other locations?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.